In conscience, you feel you have to go to war. And therefore, you go to war, and therefore, you've done what's right. Because you have to follow your conscience. That's it, isn't it? You have to follow your conscience. And of course, that's true. You have to follow your conscience. That is unquestioned. You must follow your conscience. In the Catholic Church, and in most other churches, conscience is primary. There is a primacy of conscience. Nothing overrides conscience. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean that there's a carte blanche in terms of moral responsibility, moral obligation, moral discernment, because you're following your conscience. Conscience is intimately tied to consciousness. A person's consciousness, that is, the content of what the person is aware of as truth or untruth, has to be the content of conscience. And therefore, suppose there is truth, that if I were to know it, I would act another way, but I don't know it. We are immediately into a problem of conscience. Do I not know that truth that I cannot choose because I could not possibly have known it? That is, I'm not culpable for my ignorance. Or do I know that, or do I not know that truth that I should know because I have not done the work to know it that I should have done? That is, I am culpable. I am responsible for not knowing the truth. I've avoided it. I've not looked at it. Maybe I've not looked at it because I know where if I started to look it would lead me. But I have not looked at it, and therefore I've done that intentionally, and therefore I am culpable. Well, conscience that says do something, and the content of consciousness is all you have, and it says that's right to do, well, that's fine. You are not. You are following your conscience. But if the content of your consciousness, is off because you did not do the kind of homework you're supposed to do, the kind of reflection you're supposed to do, the kind of thinking you're supposed to do about truth, the truth at hand, and therefore you're in ignorance because you've chosen to be in ignorance, well, that's a different story altogether. Culpable conscience is evil. Culpable conscience is a sin. How many people have we heard say, oh, I didn't know what was going on during the Holocaust. I had no idea what was going on during the Holocaust. These are German people, Austrian people, Catholic people. I had no idea, in Europe, I had no idea what was going on. When in fact, all they had to do was do the simplest kinds of observations, have the simplest kind of conversations, and they would have known something was terrible that was going on. Terrible. Over the last 10 years, Britain and the United States, Britain and the United States have been tearing the people of Iraq apart. It's estimated that 1 million people have been killed and millions more maimed in the 10 years that Britain and the United States have been there. My judgment is, as I go around the United States and around Britain to some extent, the bishops, the priests, the ministers, the Christians are saying, are more or less intentionally oblivious to the reality. And therefore, they're telling people, and so also with the people in the pews. And therefore, everyone says, well, you know, there's a just war, and the church says we can go to we can go to war, and therefore I can go. That's not the church's teaching. The church's teaching is you can only go to a war if it's a just war and it meets certain standards. But I'm not going to look to see whether the standards are being met or not. Says the bishop, says the priest, says the pastor, says the minister, says the person in the pew. Well, if you're not going to look, for example, in the just war theory, as most churches possess it, as most churches have it to teach but don't teach it, it is intrinsically grave evil to take an innocent life. Intrinsically grave evil. That is, in the Catholic parlance, it's mortal sin. To take the life of an innocent person. Now, if it's an accident by which you take the life, you know, you're over there as a soldier and you're firing a gun at an enemy and someone runs across the path and you don't even see them coming, well, that's collateral damage. That's unintentional homicide. But what about when you're in a war and you have killed about 600,000 innocent people, civilians? Not one. When you've poured artillery into Fallujah and simply wiped out a whole city, most of whom are civilian. I mean, exactly at what point does the British Christian and the American Christian have to admit to himself, I'm in ignorance about what's going on, but I am in ignorance because I've chosen to be. And therefore, my decisions, moral decisions in relationship to this war, what I call my decisions in conscience, are not conscientious decisions at all. They're unconscionable. Because they are supporting what if I had to praise myself of what was going on, and how it is utterly in nonconformity with the teachings of the church, I could not have supported this. And so, it's no good to say the church teaches a just war. The church has a just war theory. Because even if the church does, you do not and you cannot hand your conscience even over to the church. You have got to make the decision. Is this a just war or isn't this a just war? And therefore, just to say the church teaches a just war, that there is such a thing, does not relieve you of the moral responsibility to look at the facts, to see what the truth of the matter is, to see if those standards of the just war are being met before you support it or participate in it. If you don't do that, then you have defied your own conscience, which is the final moment between you and God at the day of judgment. Not did you or did you adhere to something that someone told you, but did you or did you adhere to what you knew in conscience was the truth of the matter? Or did you follow what was untruth? Conscience is indeed primary in the church. But it's not just something where you say, my conscience says I can do this, and you do it without the slightest bit of investigation, without any concern for the truth of the matter in reality.